Hello, 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 everybody. Hello, welcome to the stream. Welcome, welcome, hello, all. I am Phi, the Neutrophil. I am very happy to see all of you today. Today, we have a special guest on. It's my office mate, Min. Min, can you please introduce yourself?
Hey, what's up? Thanks, Phi, for having me on your channel. I've been pretty excited seeing it grow alongside you, and it's a really nice honor just to be able to chat with you on this stream.
That's very sweet of you to say. Just want to say hi, hello to all. Thank you for checking in. Very happy that we can offer Min a stream where we actually have people in the audience, which is super duper exciting. So yeah, I'm taking a look at this poll, and I was just chatting with Min behind the scenes, all the people that had picked Archaea. I'm surprised that Archaea is as popular as it is. In fact, Min, I believe you also voted for IKEA, right?
Yep, that is true. To be honest, I don't know as much about Archaea as I should or think I should. But I think that degree of mystery is what makes me attracted to it all the more. For me, I just know Archaea as those extremophiles that live in unexpected corners of the world. And just like, yeah, how do they do it? Doing the unthinkable with minimal, with a minimum.
Yeah, that's why I was like behind the scenes. I was like, I was kind of teasing him about it because I was like, how much do you actually know about Archaea to begin with? Like, I was so surprised as to how popular this category is. So I'm like, are you some kind of fake fan? But I do believe in like that mystery is also quite tempting, or maybe I'm just a butthurt fanboy of Bacteria.
You voted for Bacteria. Okay.
I go for Bacteria, man. I love Bacteria. Hi, Sai. Sideray is a psychologist VTuber. You can find her on twitch.tv. So glad to see you here today. She is a psychologist, meaning that she may be more qualified to talk about some of these topics more than I am. So I'm happy to see you in the chat and hope you can stick around some. So let's get the heck right into it. All right. So let's start with our agenda. So first off, I just want to do introductions. Since the last time I've streamed, there are a lot more eyes on the channel now, so I just figured it'd be good to catch people up on who I am and what we do, but also to introduce myself in a way that is qualifying. Like, why are Min and I, or in what way are Min and I qualified to talk about scientific taste and the implications of that? So I'll go first. So I'm Fi the Neutrophil. I am a single-celled cell of the immune system, but my day job is teaching at a university level. It's my full-time job. I teach biological engineering, and so I am not going to be talking about scientific taste through the lens of like a virtuoso scientist, right? So I'm not a Nobel Prize winner. I'm not like deep in the sauce. I'm here to talk about taste as it relates to students and cultivating that kind of interest in the sciences. And then I'll pass it to you, Min.
Yeah, likewise, by virtue of being Fi's office mate, I contain a few more cells than Fi, but I also am passionate about teaching, and I teach a laboratory class for bioengineering, and I would say I'm pretty early in my academic career or journey, so a lot of my inputs on what scientific taste is and a lot of topics of today's discussion are most likely coming from someone who is very excited, a dash of naivety, but excited nonetheless.
Yeah, so Min is selling himself a little short, honestly. Like, yes, Min is very early in his career, and now he is about to leave me forever to explore that career. But in terms of Min's academic accolades, this dude is like absolutely cracked. Like, he's goated with the sauce. And so I think that I do treat him as my equal in terms of like, even though we have maybe a difference in the progress of our careers, in the sense where I'm pretty sure I want to teach for like the rest of my life in some capacity. That doesn't, from my perspective, mean that his opinion is worth any less than mine or anybody else's, because again, qualifying our perspectives on what we're about to talk about. It's two teachers talking about why stuff is cool. So I just want to get that out of the way, right?
Yep, that's right.
Yep. So let's talk about what I am going to be defining as scientific tastes. So there's not, I think, one agreed upon definition, but if we take a look here, I think that taste in science is analogous to taste in art. So why do some people like painting? Why do they like certain movies or certain genres? It's because it has some amount of appeal to that person. And so if I think about the components that go into why you like the things that you like, there are many like little subcategories that I could think of. This is probably not exhaustive, but it's what I think comprise or influences why you like the things that you like. So, you know, competency could play into it. Like, are you good at something? If you're good at art early, that can build a level of confidence that makes you like art more. I think that's a reasonable transition or a reasonable contribution. There's affinity, so something about what you're researching or studying or practicing just kind of meshes well, like you catch on to it very quickly. Exposure, your taste can be influenced by the people around you, so if everybody around you is really into Game of Thrones, then you might pick up that show as well, and maybe that'll subtly influence the kind of stuff that you like down the line. Novelty, right? Humans are like wired to seek that novelty, so if something is new and interesting, that might affect your taste. Fun, I have no further explanation for that. Sometimes the things that you like are just fun for you. Relatability, this mostly relates to art. If you find art that you highly relate to, that can influence your taste. So if you like portraiture, because you like seeing other people, that's like the clearest cut example of relatability that I could think of. And community, so this goes along with exposure, that the people that you surround yourself with and your friends will have that kind of influence on what you like as well. Min, do you have anything to add or react in terms of this definition of taste?
I think this diagram it suggests that already, that like taste is just, there's so many factors that go into it, and I think this is a really good jumping point. Like for me, I would say I only started developing, let's say, my own agency or my own personal taste for the science in recent years. I think before it was just hopping on the most recent hype train, or seeing what my mentors or people I looked up to liked doing, and calling that my own taste. But I'm starting in recent years to start to curate it, and these axes that you've listed out here are kind of ways in which I can like describe the way I've developed my taste.
Great. So we'll get into that a little more in just a little bit. But before that, I want to get ahead of kind of why we're talking about taste in our capacity. And I think it's because developing taste is a major component of fostering passion, right? And so, I was thinking of trying to get into some research. I wanted to do like a pseudo journal club where I did some digging in Google Scholar and find research about cultivating passion. But the papers that I found were all from like parenting journals, which I found to be really, really bizarre, and I felt very uncomfortable with that kind of research for some reason. I mean, maybe it says something about my attitude towards parenting. So I've decided to not do that. And so for the audience watching, this is not an academic discussion. This is me and my office mate waxing poetic about our experience as teachers and as enjoyers of science and engineering. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, that's about right.
Great. So why do we care about fostering passion? Before I get into why, Min and I care, I want to ask the chat. So, chat, how big do you think, or how much do you think passion plays in your day-to-day life? I'm really curious as to what your lived experience of passion is. Like, do you let passion dictate or guide a lot of your lived experience? Min and I can talk about like the role that passion plays in our lives. Eric says, no, it isn't. No, it ain't. I'm sorry to hear that. If you're comfortable with sharing why, I'd love to know, just because there's all sorts of different perspectives on this topic. But I'll go first in terms of talking about, passion from my perspective. I was always a kid that was like very good at school because my parents were pretty strict, and I wanted to be a good kid. I had that internal motivation to just stick with what my parents were making me do. And so I would say that, for a large majority of my life, passion was not a tremendous motivator for me. But when it came to actually deciding what I wanted to do for the rest of my life and how I'm going to make money, that's when that spark actually happened. So school being this artificial environment, which I love, by the way. I'm a teacher. I don't dislike school, but I do think that there are aspects of school that make cultivating a genuine passion somewhat difficult. Nowadays, I think that I operate a large majority of how I operate in life now is guided by that passion, and we'll talk about the pros and cons of that down the line. I want to hear from you, Min.
Yeah, like I agree with you, especially in being in the position as like teachers. Like we're most likely here because we really like the content and just this learning environment where we're learning, we're also teaching. But I was actually of the opinion that doing something out of passion is a luxury. I know for some people, like passion is a must-have for pursuing anything in life, but I think I could actually do things I find very boring and not be passionate about. So the fact that I do get to do something I'm passionate about and let my curiosity like drive me, I consider myself lucky. But again, maybe this is just a matter of perspective.
I absolutely agree with that. Like, and I wanted to get into that a little later, but you bring up an excellent point. I mean, no, it's great because we can talk about it now. It's actually a pretty good transition. Where like, I am lucky that I get to do what I actually want to do, but it is not required to do what you want to do for a happy life. Like, it's nice, but not required, and we'll get into that a little further down the line.
Yes.
So passion, I think, does play a role in the life of a student. Whether or not it is a big role or a little role, it has to play some role. Just because you either have it, you have a lot of it, you have a little bit of it, or you don't have passion at all for what you do, it's a thing that you have to address, right? And so I have here a 4-factor model. It was 3 when I last talked to you, Min, so I'm popping a 4th one on you out of nowhere.
Ooh, nice.
A 4-factor model that I came up with. So this isn't backed up by any research. Again, this is just me basically writing my thoughts down on paper, right? As from my experience as a teacher. So I think there are these 4 factors that go into, I call student competency. So this is not a career thing, right? Like, these traits don't determine how successful you'll be at a job, because I can't speak to that. I'm a teacher. I see students. And so this is only talking about student success, right? And so I think that there are these 4 different categories: discipline, grit, passion, and metacognition. And I'll go into a little bit about like what I think these are, and then we can have a discussion as to like, to what degree do we feel this describes us, right? So, source, it came to me in a dream, says Sai. True. That was a real thing, right? I think the PCR guy, like actually thought of PCR in a dream. Someone might fact check me, but
I'm not sure about the PCR one specifically, but I know a lot of scientists and mathematicians, like Richard Hamming comes to mind. He says like before going to sleep every night, he would like think about a problem so that he would like go to sleep thinking about the problem, and maybe an epiphany would come up in a dream, or when he was refreshed in the next morning, that's he would just continue off from his dream.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you know about the Tetris effect, Min?
No, I don't.
So the Tetris effect is like, it was originally used to describe when people were getting really into Tetris, that they would like fall asleep and be like playing Tetris subconsciously in their brain.
Oh my goodness.
And I experienced that like very, very heavily, to the point where like, if I like go on a roller coaster, I'll re-experience the drop of the roller coaster. And I can't go back to like bed. Six Flags. Yeah, in my bed, I'll repeatedly experience that drop. But it's also been useful in the sense where like, I remember taking Python, like intro to programming, right? And like, I couldn't wrap my head around how object-oriented programming worked. Like, it didn't click with me. And I remember one night I had a dream and everything made sense in the dream. And when I woke up, I like ran out of my bed to write all of that code down. Like, you know, we don't know a ton about the function of dreams. But it's cool.
yeah, the brain is full of mysteries and fun.
Sai says there are a few psych theories that came to people in a dream or in the shower, and they're actually solid. I wonder if there's something about the reduced level of control, like conscious control you have in those moments where you're allowed to subconsciously work on stuff, which I find kind of interesting.
again, maybe I'm letting this tangent, or I'm feeding into the tangent, but like there's so many discoveries of people just like taking a walk and like, oh my gosh, epiphany, or like on a boat and doing nothing and they're like, oh my gosh, epiphany. And maybe this is just the moral of the story is like take a break and like take it easy sometimes, like maybe that's where the spark of inspiration will come from.
Yeah, and sleep.
Yes, sleep, yes.
Okay, let's get into this 4-factor model that I totally made up. Discipline. So this is my favorite factor of the 4 factors because I think it's the best. And so I'm defining discipline as the ability to form good productive habits and efficient time management skills. So things that require discipline are like working out every day, practicing an instrument every day, learning a language requires a lot of discipline, not cramming. Like if you are cramming before an exam, that is a sign of maybe low discipline. And I think that this is the best factor in this 4-factor model because from my perspective, the most powerful trait in this model is one that there are no downsides to. So everybody can form good study habits. Everybody can learn a language if they tried. You know, this is something that is not gated by sociobiology or in my perspective, right? So the students that have high discipline, I think from my perspective, the really disciplined students perform on average better, just flat out. How does that sound to you?
I let's see. I like the idea that everyone can be disciplined, but sometimes like my mind wanders to certain like subset of my friends that are like maybe diagnosed with ADHD, and then I feel like I would offend them if I said, "Oh, you should just be more disciplined." But I think they do have their own mechanisms for holding themselves accountable. It just looks very different from how I hold myself accountable and disciplined.
Yes, and so thank you for mentioning that. I actually had that in my notes and totally glossed over it. That these are not fixed prescriptions in terms of like, oh, just do it 5 head, right? Like, but these are mutable, right? Your level of discipline can change. And this mutability will actually be important when I talk about something that I'll get to in a couple of slides. But yeah, so this is the thing that every teacher wants their students to do, right? A lot of teachers will be like, don't study the night before. Like, take notes after lecture, reread your notes. And like, how many people actually do that? I have no idea. I didn't do it.
Yeah.
Did you do it, Ned?
To an extent, but I can always have been better about it. But always on the other side, now that we're teachers, we just like, you're really shooting yourself in the foot if you're cramming. It's helping nobody, and especially doing a disservice to yourself.
Yeah, cramming is the absolute worst. Like,
it's stressful for the student themselves, but when they're like bombarding the teachers with questions at the very last moment, it's stressful for us too.
Yeah, that totally sucks. You're absolutely right. Okay, so in my opinion, discipline is the one that is the most easy to improve, or the most straightforward. I shouldn't say easy, but most straightforward. Like, you know what you need to do. You need to do it every day. That might be hard for you, but it's straightforward. It's going to result in greater competency, period. The rest of these are less straightforward. So, grit. I'm defining grit as the ability to survive hardship, the ability to recover from failure. And this is also really important when it comes to competency, but it's not as useful as discipline. So this is just your ability to take the crap that life gives you and just deal with it. The reason why I think that this is less good than discipline is that grit requires your mental to be like really good. Sorry, one sec. The Dyslexic Demon asks, are you guys teachers in high school or university? We're both university teachers.
Yes.
So this is actually a really important distinction that I want to make between university teachers and like teachers that are teaching younger students, is that by the time you get to college, you're an adult, which means we just get to be teachers, right? You and I. If you're teaching high school or middle school or elementary, not only do you have to be a teacher, you also have to be a social worker. You also have to be a therapist. You also have to, you have to have more hats on. But in university, we live a pretty blessed life where we can just teach.
Yep. Yep.
But even so, like this, the environment is requiring of some of these traits, right? So, if you have high grit and low discipline, you're just like cramming every day, and your life is gonna suck. You're gonna eat up, precious sleep hours, and your body might not be able to take it. I don't know if grit is mutable. So I don't know if you can improve your tolerance for pain. That's not something I can confidently say.
Very interesting. The way it's described here, and I guess the way I've thought about it, grit is almost like friction. It's like, whereas discipline, it's like a habit that's kind of effortless and not like driven by emotion. Like grit kind of sounds more like how well can you chafe against life and like endure this friction, kind of.
Yeah, and I'll illustrate all of these with myself when I get to my own self-assigned statistics.
Okay.
But why I put this, like, is this trait immutable? Like, nobody should aim, I think, to improve their grit in a way. Like, there's a common complaint, I think, with educators now that we're noticing a trend that students are coming in with less grit, that they're less able to handle hardship. And like, I think that might be true from certain perspectives, but like, I don't think the goal should be to improve grit, because if you improve discipline, then you're not going to need as much grit, right? Like, that shouldn't be a goal, but it is nice to have this trait, just resilience, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now I'm going to get to metacognition. This trait. So metacognition is the awareness of one's own mental process. Students trained, so this is real research that I did, research not like me personally, but research that I read. Students that were trained in metacognitive practices outperformed those without similar training. So if you are aware of how your own brain works and you understand how to improve your own thought process, then that will improve your competency. So this is another thing like discipline where you can change this. Like, the more aware you are of how you learn, the better off you'll be. So this involves like experimenting with learning strategies. If you're getting your ass kicked in a class and nothing you do is working, the ability to try more things, to be aware of what works and what doesn't, that's metacognitive. And being proactive in the learning process. So not just, taking notes during lecture. That's like, I think, such a bait. It's bait, I think. Like, if you think you're studying by just taking notes in lecture, that's like step 0.1. Like, that's really not enough, okay? And then this whole discussion is metacognitive too. So we're talking about how people think, and thinking about thinking is metacognitive.
Yeah. I don't know if you're gonna like, I know you expressed discipline is like you think is the strongest of the four, but to be honest, like I would rank metacognition as number one for my books.
I think my argument for discipline being number one is that it is both necessary and sufficient to do well.
Okay.
So if you are just disciplined, you're gonna get far. And if you have none of these other traits, if you're like if you max out your discipline, like Rock Lee from Naruto, if you just max out discipline, you're gonna kick ass, like no matter what.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
That's how I'm grading it.
You're gonna use Naruto analogies, okay? Then, but metacognition is like regulates the other three. I don't know if you see it that way, but I'm like, if you're aware of your discipline level and your grit level and your other ones, like you have that kind of like second order awareness and you can like, you realize you could play the game like, or I don't know, it's like you realize that they are stats.
Where I draw that line is that metacognition is not easily translatable into action, right? So discipline is directly related to action, and ultimately action is what we're after, right? We want to see those high grades.
Yeah.
But I agree that metacognition is definitely top two, I think, of these four.
Okay.
All right, so the final one, and the discussion that we are going to head into later on in this stream, is passion. And despite it being the topic of this stream, I actually rank passion as the least useful of these traits, and I think that might be a little controversial, but let me explain myself. First, I'm going to define passion as joy associated with any kind of work that you do. So you don't necessarily have to have passion for your studies, for example. You can have passion for gaming or craft or, whatever. It helps because if you are passionate about the thing that you are studying, that makes studying it easier. It makes the motivation required to do it easier. It makes the experience less miserable, right? I think that's fair. I think it's the least powerful factor. It is kind of isolating in terms of its actual affect. So like if you just have passion but you don't have discipline or grit, you can't translate that into action, right? And so that's why I think passion is like the worst one. It's also a potent double-edged blade because passion, I think, is probably a component of personality, right? So are you a person that can tolerate doing what you don't like? And Min, I would say that, judging from the way that we talk about stuff, like you just had mentioned that you might be okay with doing stuff that you don't want to do for a long time, right?
With like nuances, but yeah, I would say yeah.
I would say that I am highly intolerant of doing something that I don't love. It's my time, and I want to spend my time doing stuff that I like. So my resistance is quite high, which is good in some sense, where like I'm single-mindedly trying to be like the best teacher that I can be, the most employable teacher that I can be. But if there ever is a case where I'm not able to do this job, that would be emotionally devastating, right? So it's literally a double-edged blade where it can be very motivating, but it can also have personal consequences, right? And so figuring out how much passion matters to you personally is important for your own happiness. We had said earlier that you don't have to love what you do. In fact, I think that's a big millennial bait. The bait that we were promised, that is, just do what you love. Not necessarily the approach that works for everybody, which is why I wanted to talk about the nuances of it today. You have anything to add to that, Min?
I think there will probably be more room for the discussion later if we're going to segue into this passion, so I'll hold that thought for a second.
Great. So, I actually left out one major trait that people might think about, and I kind of want to ask chat if there's a glaring omission that you notice about like the factors that go into student success. And I'm gonna do a bit of a hydration check while chat maybe ponders that question. So I say discipline is important, I say passion is important, I say grit and metacognition. I'm missing something that a lot of people would also put on this list. Does passion boost grit in your definition? Yes. So these like traits are not totally isolated. If you have enough passion, then I think that can bleed over to the other categories. But why I choose to define them separately is because you can separate them, right? You can think of somebody...
There's some coupling.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Min.
Oh yeah, so yeah, there probably is some coupling between like all these 4 factors. But yeah, I think it's a good starting point for discussing like different areas you can focus on, and go on, Fi.
You can imagine that there's probably people out there who love certain things, but maybe are personally paralyzed by their own self-doubt, for example, right? Maybe someone with heavy imposter syndrome, to the point where they can't actually convince themselves to spend the time to do the thing that they want to do. I would describe that person as having high passion, but low grit, low discipline, or maybe low I don't know. Like that's not very clean in terms of like how I would describe that in the 4-factor model. But the idea is that if you didn't have imposter syndrome, that would enable your discipline, that would enable your grit to really show, right? But if you shoot yourself in the foot immediately by discounting yourself, that's no good, right?
Yeah, just one hypothesis of how these 4 factors can relate to one another. We usually think of factors as being additive, but an alternative is like the factors are actually multiplicative. So let's say you have like you maxed out on 3 of the stats, but you're absolutely like nothing in the 4th stat. Like is your overall how good of a student you are, like going to be zero because you're basically multiplying by zero after all that, or I don't know. Just another way of thinking about how these factors can relate to each other.
Yeah. So that's actually a really good transition into what I am saying is the fifth factor that doesn't actually matter that much. And that is intelligence. So here we're talking about studying, we're talking about students. We have these four factors, and something that is very tempting to imagine is a big part of student competency is intelligence. And I disagree with that, and I'm actually gonna it's dark here now and I forgot to turn on the light, so I'm gonna be right back. I'll just read these out and then I'll go turn on the light. So basically, I don't think intelligence is that important, and so I'm not going to define intelligence. That's a sticky subject in and of itself, but our common understanding of intelligence, right? I think intelligence is neither sufficient nor necessary for student competency. I think intelligence is a force multiplier. So we were saying, like, you know, exponential influence or whatever, but it's insufficient for manifestation of goals because you get, you know, these gifted kids who burn out because they never learn discipline, they never have grit. Sure, they might be able to learn at an accelerated pace, but eventually things get too hard for that to be enough, right? And I also think it's not useful to talk about because the moment you start worrying about how intelligent you are, I think a lot of doors get closed. So people believe that IQ is fixed, that you are just born with a better brain or a worse brain. And so adopting that belief is a very fast way to have your like dreams be out of your reach, right? If you never chase them because you think you're just like stupid, like that's not a productive mentality to have, right? And discipline,
really
passion, maybe grit, and metacognition are all mutable traits, meaning they can be changed, increased or decreased, right? If you believe intelligence is fixed, then that's not an option for you, so why even bother thinking about it anyway? In my opinion, the only people that should think about... Oh, I put this box here so that I can stand on my soapbox. The only people that should think about, like, IQ are like school psychologists, in my opinion, right? If you are trying to help someone who is developmentally delayed, that might be useful in that regard. But for most people, this is not like an issue. And I'm gonna go turn on the light. Min, if you could share your thoughts with chat and then repeat them for me later. I'll be right back.
Yeah, I feel like this area, like, of intelligence, and like if you think about the history of intelligence and IQ tests, like what kind of conditions were those born from? And I think it was like the industrial kind of era, productivity, trying to like min-max workers and like in the workforce. Like if you think about the history of which like these things spin out, like it's pretty interesting. I know the idea of like one buzzword that floats out there a lot is like a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, just to like use some vocabulary from quote unquote the literature of but yeah, I think it is not a useful axis to think about your success in life. Yeah.
Cool. Hey, Rain Napper, welcome to the stream. We are talking about my kind of made up four-factor model of student success. I think that student success should be understood through four different lenses, one being discipline, one being metacognition, one being grit, and the other being passion. We're talking about passion today. So I did hear the most of that, so yeah, totally agree with you, Min. But now I want to transition to a bit of a fun activity in case anybody in chat wants to participate. And I want to kind of see if you want to share like what you think your own stats are along these four axes, right? So I'll share mine. And Min, I'll ask you if you thought about your own stats to share yours.
Okay.
But I'll share mine. So when I was in school, this is how I think my stats were distributed. So when I was still a student. So I think that being the good, studious child that I was, that I had pretty high grit. I spent a lot of summers in summer school, cram school. I got really good at taking tests. Like, I worked my ass off at a lot of stages of my education. Not and I didn't do it very well. I just kind of threw my brain at things, and I did that repeatedly until I got the number that I wanted. So I would say that I had high grit. I would say that I had low discipline because I would cram a lot. I wasn't really good at time management, but because I had high grit, I was able to accomplish what I needed to accomplish. Passion, I would say I'm like a 7 in school. Like, I liked things, I was curious about things, but I didn't really like give in to the passion. If this might be a weird way of saying it, but I didn't really feel like passion motivated my actions all that much. And in terms of metacognition, like, I went to cram school, so I was aware of how you should study for exams, so I'm like okay at that. This was me in school. Min, and anybody in chat who wants to like share what they think their stats are, I think that'd be fun to talk about, a little bit of a reflection exercise.
Yeah, I never really ranked these 4-factor. I guess I'm hearing about this framework right now, but I would say my number 1 or my top 2 contenders would be between metacognition and discipline, and then probably
sorry, Sabrina brought up a really good point that the 4 factors are cut off on my OBS. Okay. So let me quickly, before you go on too much longer, yes, just the bottom of the thing was cut off, and your PNG is okay. There we go. Okay, sorry. So go on.
Yeah, so I would say the top 2 contenders are passion and metacognition. I'll explain that in a bit. Followed by
we're good now. The OBS is good now. I'll type it out in chat.
Okay. Can I continue?
Yep.
Oh yeah. In third place would probably be passion, and then like I think lagging a lot is grit. And I think that combination of having high metacognition and discipline with very low grit actually helped, because let's say I stumble upon a challenge and like I don't want to pull this all-nighter. I don't want to like strain myself. Like, I think that's when my metacognition would kick in and be like, okay, like I am very uncomfortable right now. What adjustments can I make to my life or like habits to actually like, succeed without having to endure like a lot of pain? So maybe you could consider that like the lazy way, or like trying to work smarter and not like bang my head against the wall the whole time. But I think I did okay. I think I did okay for that distribution of stats.
Again, Min is being extremely freaking like humble. I watched him get like every award like known to our university. Was nuts. So I would take that seriously coming from I think it's pretty easy for me to say that I do believe you are a better student than I was at the equivalent stage, because again, like having high discipline and high metacognition is like the combo that you want, right? Like passion and grit are nice, but not as good, I think.
Yeah. But yeah, that was a fun exercise. I'll have to ask my other friends what they think their distribution is.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Some people are sharing their distributions in chat as well.
Yeah, I can't help but to think of other like video games that I've played where there's like stats that you invest in, and like and there's different classes of characters and jobs and stuff, and like depending on like what kind of style you are, you just have to invest in different stats.
I want to be careful about that, because I believe my psychologist friend might tut me about putting labels on people.
Yes, it is yes.
So this is a reflective exercise, not necessarily like, oh, I'm a passionate person. It's more like there are these multitudes. You contain multitudes.
There we go.
To demonstrate the idea that these categories are mutable, I'm actually going to go one step further and reassess myself where I think I am, like, today, right? So, yeah, it's giving educational MBTI vibes. I'm not claiming this is, like, real science. I'm just saying that this is, like, a useful, like, lens to, like, see yourself through, I think. But yeah, so to illustrate why I think it's, like, mutable and why these 4 factors are more interesting than intelligence is because you can't change them, right? So I think nowadays I'm much more metacognitive. You know, I've gotten training to be a teacher, so I'm a lot more aware of, you know, research-backed strategies that work for students in terms of how they learn. And so that has carried over to an increase in discipline because, like, I can better formulate to myself how I should be learning certain things. So that doesn't mean that everything comes easy to me, but it does mean I have to work less hard to learn the same amount as I used to. And that is accompanied by a decrease in grit. Like, I was a very studious, like, just get through it, you know, bash my head repeatedly. But now I'm like a lot softer, you know. I'm not in that much pain anymore when I have to learn stuff, right?
That's good to hear. I'm glad to hear it, yeah.
And passion, I think the importance of passion in my life has increased, and the stuff that I'm passionate about, I've become more passionate about. Part of that was grad school, just learning a lot more about biology, but also admitting to myself that I didn't want to be a doctor was like a huge deal. So I spent my entire studious little life thinking I was going to do medicine professionally. But that actually handicapped me in exploring what I actually wanted to do, and that was to learn and share biology. And so I think life circumstances have allowed that passion stat to increase. Could you describe grit roughly as the ability to fixate? I wouldn't go that far. I would say mostly that it's the ability to withstand hardship is the way that I would say it. Yeah. Yeah, sorry, Min, you had a thought?
Yeah, I think for me, I definitely agree about the mutability, because if I reassess myself in like my current stage of life, actually passion would play like a very, very like big role, especially when my goals are still like kind of still in the phase of being they're kind of fuzzy right now, so I don't have like this very tangible thing to pursue. So I think I am fueled at this stage of life by a lot of passion and these like idealistic ideas, more so than discipline, compared to when I was a student. And maybe because like when I was a student, where grades are constantly looming over my head, passion does not matter so much to you as a student until you start thinking about purpose afterwards.
I love that. And it echoes what I said earlier, where like, even though we love school, getting a number associated with your success is like a bummer for cultivating passion, like no matter what, right? Like that's putting pseudo artificial stakes on your performance. It's not artificial entirely, right? Like, you do better in school, you get a higher GPA, you look more attractive to companies. You know, high GPA is neither sufficient nor necessary. I'm saying that a lot this stream. It's neither sufficient nor necessary for success, but it does help a lot.
Yes.
Like, people say like, oh, you know, you don't need school. Well, you don't need school, but school is pretty good.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I also, for people who've shared their like 4-factor, in chat, I kind of want to know like what the experience was like rating yourself on those scales, or like I'm wondering if that's given you a little more insight into how you yourself operate. And I'll definitely try to read your responses later on in the stream, because I like, to me this makes this like exercise made me more self-aware in terms of like how I function, which was nice, and like proof of principle, like this is useful for at least me. Because like in school, right, like I didn't really care about my non-biology classes, and it was a lot harder for me to do well in them because I just didn't care.
Yeah. That aspect of reflecting, especially during your time as a student, it's like no essay about reflecting about my life is gonna like improve my physics exam score. I'm just gonna grind it out. Just having like, I would say post-student life or just having a short break from it was very helpful. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I don't envy being a student. If you're still in school, like you have my sympathies.
Yeah.
In my opinion, life gets better after you graduate, but our job is to make sure that you graduate in the best possible state.
Yep, exactly. Not burnt out, not disillusioned with the world. Yes, those are big pluses.
Yeah, with the skills that you need to do whatever it is that you want to do.
Yep.
Okay, so we went over these 4 factors. Hopefully, I have convinced you that it is worth thinking about passion as a concept. And so now let's talk about what or how passion can be cultivated. Again, not a psychologist, so this is not backed by any research, but we're just like shit talking about stuff. So I'm gonna borrow from this dude. So Terence Tao, for those of you who don't know, is commonly described as the greatest mathematician currently alive. So he's a mathematician goated with the sauce. And Terence Tao wrote an essay describing what constitutes as good mathematics. And so I am going to shamelessly rip off that essay and try to apply that to science. And by looking at what we consider to be good science, it can give us a lens as to how we feel about the science that is being done. So, Min and I are science teachers, and so this is what we're most capable of talking about, are our experiences in science. But it doesn't have to be science, right? Like cultivating passion, I think, is quite general, but analyzing what about the stuff that you like is actually, I think, pretty important, right? Like you can like a painting, but I think you get more out of it if you know why you like the painting.
Yes.
Okay. So Rainapper says, I found that having low grit and discipline naturally steered me towards things that I enjoyed and was good at. I dropped classes or focuses because I couldn't get myself to push through. Yeah, so that's actually a really cool interaction that like guides your decision making, as we were saying. Like these not only determine how you react to the stuff that school throws at you, but how you navigate through that pool, which I think is cool. Metacognition helps to trick myself into enjoying things so that I can frame them as passions. Interesting strategy.
Yeah.
I think, Mid, you had a similar sentiment, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like, I think the reason why I could do stuff I actually don't like is because my metacognition allows me to reframe it as like, but this is a means towards an end that you actually do like. So that helps me get through it.
Gaslighting yourself.
Yes.
The dyslexic demon says, a lot of people in my major say passion is super important. The field, aerospace, holy cow, aerospace. Known to be very brutal, and at some point passion is the only thing that you have in the battery tank. Yeah, so that's like where we stop in terms of our Min and I's expertise, right? Like the field, your actual job, is a totally different beast than school is. So I wish you good luck with that in the future. So very cool. Okay, so let's talk about what Terence thinks makes math good. And Terence, in this essay, which is pinned in the chat if you want to give that a quick glance, Terence starts by defining math in this hugely multi-dimensional way. So if you want the actual definitions of what Terence thinks makes for good math, you can go ahead and read into that paper. And I'll leave this on screen just to have like a moment for reflection. So why do you like the things that you like? And I don't know, if we want to like leave it in the academic realm, we can, but I think in general we can answer this like throughout whatever you enjoy. I think here I say, why do you like biology? Because you're on a biology channel. I recognize that might not be some people's self-selecting, but also like I get that not everybody here is a biologist or a hopeful biologist. And so we'll tab back here and I'll just, we'll take a water break, and I want to hear from people, and I want to hear from you, Min, like which of these resonates with you. The dyslexic demon says, I'm in aerospace and MCDB. Is that like astrobiology? I'm not entirely sure what that is. But yeah, I'm gonna take a quick drink and y'all can read through this multi-dimensional list. while
It'd be
people
funny
are
if,
while people are reading through or maybe thinking, I'll just say that like I knew Terrence Tao was like a super cracked mathematician. Like he's very, very tremendously famous, but I actually didn't know a lot about him. Min, you actually recommended that I look at this work. Do you
yeah.
have anything you want to share about Terrence as like
Oh,
context?
I honestly, I shared the link. I think I could have read it a bit more in detail, but again, like you, I've heard of Terrence Tao. He's come up again and again in like classes, and people would refer to him as like the modern day math celebrity. But I think, yeah, I don't have too much on him.
When I was reading this essay, I was like, he is an amazing writer. He's so good at writing. Like,
Uh-huh.
I'm just so impressed at how readable that essay was. So I really recommend, if you're curious about this, to give that a read. It's very accessible for the average person, which I found to be surprising. Although some of the particulars about the math that he talks about were a little like wild.
Hmm. Yeah.
But yeah. So, sorry, Ben, go on.
I was saying like, well, it was one reason why you were surprised about how well he communicated was like for me at least when I hear like some kind of math celebrity, I'm like, there's no way I'm gonna understand a single word that comes out of their mouth. But I think it comes to show that being good at whatever you're doing and being able to communicate it well is like two different like skills that aren't necessarily working against each other. They definitely complement each other.
Yeah. Oh, this is a really good chance for me to ask the dyslexic demon. It's a difficult screen name to say, but I have this particular bias, and Min is referring to this particular bias, where like in my experience, my biology classes were better than my physics or math or engineering classes because the professors put the time in to like figure out how to communicate well. I don't know if that's universal, but every time, yeah, like when I walk into like a talk given to the department, but the person giving the talk is like a computer scientist, I really try my hardest every time to understand what they're talking about. But I find that a lot of the time there is very little effort put into actually making sure your audience like understands what is being communicated. And we are fortunate to have someone who is both aerospace and molecular and cell and developmental biology. And I just want to add like one more data point to maybe that kind of bias. And I wonder if there's something about our respective fields where like biology is so narrative driven that it's a lot easier for us to tell a story than it is for something more abstract like chemistry or math. Not to like downplay my colleagues, right? Like I'm sure all my colleagues are wonderful teachers, but in my experience as a student, those classes were a lot rougher for reasons that were outside of just the material being harder.
The funny thing is, like, some people will chase it solely for the reason that it is rougher and more rigorous. Like, a lot of my peers who go into mathematics are like, oh, they want the hardcore stuff. And, like, to them, why we're driven to biology is a reason why they're driven away from biology. So I just thought that was an interesting thing.
I guess I don't have masochism as one of my factors.
There we go.
The dyslexic demon says, my aero classes are specific to aerospace engineers. The other classes are like you described. Yeah, I don't know. It's not my field, you know. I don't have anything to say to them, to teachers in other disciplines at the university level. But the biologists are doing it right for the most part, I think, from my perspective, etc. All the qualifiers. Okay. So these are Terrence Tao's dimensions of good math, and I want to kind of highlight a couple that I find are particularly important for an appreciation for biology. And Min, I'll ask you in a little bit to ask you specifically which one of these resonate with you, but to illustrate for the audience, I want to do a little activity where I'm going to talk about what I perceive as good biology. And we're going to see how these categories describe that kind of science. So, applying good science to taste with CRISPR. The font is quite small, so I'm going to do a good bit of reading this out loud, and I'm also going to make sure that everybody can see the entire slide. It's a little big. Okay, so I'm going to read this out loud, so no worries if you can't see it. But, you know, so Terence Tao has this like multi-factor model for what constitutes as good math. So we're going to see whether or not CRISPR is good biology, right? And so I'm going to read these sentences one by one. And as an exercise, you can take a look at this list that Terence Tao put together and see which of these kind of appeals to you about the biology that I'm about to describe. So first of all, if you haven't seen my CRISPR video, I did do a CRISPR video. It's the video about phage and bacteria, and we'll get into why that is in a little bit. So the CRISPR-Cas9 system, this is something that hopefully everybody in my chat will be aware of, because if you're on my channel and you don't know what CRISPR is, then boy, do I have a lot to tell you. CRISPR is one of those buzzwords, right? One of those buzzwords about biology, because it's a pretty significant revolution in the way that we do biology. So what is CRISPR? The CRISPR-Cas9 system, so it's a system of proteins and enzymes, comes from an antiviral, quote-unquote, immune system that bacteria have. When these bacteria are infected with viruses, for bacteria they're called phages, bacteria snip pieces of their viral genomic information and then store that information into their own chromosome. So this is kind of a way for bacteria to acquire an immune memory, right? So if you are aware of what, if a bacterium is infected with a phage, it'll remember that it was infected by that phage, and this is the way that happens. Hello, Risky Risk. Hello, person. Thank you for dropping in. We're talking about taste and why it's important for our appreciation of the sciences. Right now, I'm looking at a multi-factor model that Terence Tao, the great mathematician, put together, and I'm going to talk about whether or not we consider CRISPR to be good science. All right. So, the bacteria remember infection by phage, and they remember it by storing bits of phage DNA in their own chromosome, and then they'll use that genetic information to find and destroy viral genetic information. So how do they do that? The bacteria uses these stored sequences to make RNA. That RNA is then guided to the equivalent complementary genetic material that the phage is trying to use. Then the Cas9 enzyme has the ability to cut genetic material, and so the guide RNA that the bacteria makes will guide this molecular scissor, to the phage DNA, the phage genetic material, and then cut it. So if the phage can't get their genetic material into the bacteria, that phage is not going to be able to make copies of itself. So this is the bacteria's antivirus defense system. The reason why we are hearing about CRISPR-Cas9 so often is because scientists and engineers have figured out ways to use this technology to precisely edit the DNA of many, many different organisms. So, back in the old day, before the days of CRISPR, getting a mutation to stick inside of an organism was labor-intensive, expensive, and didn't have that high of a success rate. And so CRISPR really changed the game, because you can make exactly the mutation that you want to make with very little error. That error is not insignificant. Error is still something that we have to be aware of when it comes to DNA engineering. But it was very accurate, it's cheap and accessible. You can do CRISPR in an intro biology lab, with very little material to start off with. And so this revolutionized, or is revolutionizing, the way that we study biology and the way that medicine is researched, right? And the reason why people are freaking out about this is because it will have a profound impact on society. It already has, because there are a lot of ethical questions that we must address. So this is a society-shaking discovery. If this doesn't count as good biology, I don't know what does. Is this just bacteria, multicellular life as well? Risky Risk, if you're referring to CRISPR, CRISPR is a bacterial defense system used against viruses. So Um, there are similar things, I think, in multicellular organisms, but not CRISPR specifically. Okay, so we've heard the story of CRISPR, and now we want to identify what about this makes it a good story. And before I do, from my perspective, I want to hear from chat, if you want to contribute to our discussion about CRISPR. But I also want to ask Min. CRISPR is ubiquitous in biology. We've all heard of it, and we all have our thoughts and feelings, again, very important because we're talking about passion. And I want to get a read for what you feel about CRISPR, not what you think, but what you feel about CRISPR.
What do I feel? I think it's a pretty cool tool. Sometimes I wonder, like, what would biology look like if we did not stumble upon CRISPR yet? Or, like, I think it would look very, very different. Again, biology is a very wide field. So I will say, like, when it comes to genetic modifications and chemistry and stuff, like, there's a lot of exciting things in biology and, like, tools. But I would say CRISPR does not rank number one for me. So again, that's just how I feel. But I think it's cool nonetheless.
If you were to give it, yeah. Sorry, go on.
Oh, I could probably I could follow up with other cool things in the biology sphere, but if you would like me to, I could. But what was your question?
Oh, so we'll talk about what we're passionate about to kind of round out the stream, but we're specifically going to look at CRISPR as like an example of how to analyze something for taste, right?
Yeah. So go on.
So these traits, I'm wondering if you can use the language that Terrence Tao has built to describe how you feel about CRISPR.
Yeah. I think what's made it adopted so widely is one of Terrence Tao's like tenets that really pops out is just like it's adoption. I think is really a pedagogy. It's like you can conceptualize and teach CRISPR pretty like regardless of like high school student or college student. I think the idea of editing DNA is very digestible for people, and like you hear it as early as like middle school, high school, and the fact that it's on so many people's minds early on is the reason I think it's pretty successful. But also why a lot
sorry, not to cut you off, but just to hone your response a little bit. This is I'm asking you how you feel about CRISPR, right? So like, do those things, the pedagogy aspect, does that play into your enjoyment of CRISPR?
Oh, totally. Yes.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we're still on that topic.
Yeah. I would say like that's probably number one. And of course, like as a technique and being useful, I think that's also things that make me excited about CRISPR.
And what I find so interesting is that we can both, as you know, both of us are biologists, we can both look at this little blurb I put together and take out different things about like what we enjoy about a certain topic. So for you men, it's pedagogy and application. Would that be accurate?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's outline this paragraph using Terrence Tao's language. And I added one. My own is narrative, which I think is very important in biology. So these opening paragraphs, so I'm telling you that like CRISPR evolved as a way for bacteria to destroy viruses. That's a part of the story of biology, right? Like biology is basically just the story of evolution. And so to me, the narratively interesting thing about CRISPR is that it is something that occurred naturally as life evolved. And that's incredible that an organism has evolved to basically assassinate specific sequences of genetic material very precisely. And so for me, CRISPR isn't my number one either. Like I think it's very important, but in terms of my own enjoyment, I think it's cool. I think the narrative is cool. I think the downstream stuff that I'm about to talk about, not as cool. This paragraph that talks about like how CRISPR works, this CRISPR-Cas9 system, this enzyme that cleaves the guide RNA, that's called mechanism. So some people can appreciate or find the way that things happen to be cool. So not the story behind it, but just how does it work? So to me, mechanism is variable. Like, there are mechanisms that I like, mechanisms that I don't, but I don't have an inherent desire to understand mechanism. When I look at my refrigerator, there's not a single part of me that thinks, I wonder how my refrigerator works, right? It does, and I'm happy with that. Do you feel similarly, Min, or are you more the like broadly curious about how things work type of person?
I think I'm on that latter group, and I think in our later discussion of science and engineering outlined in the beginning, we can talk more about that.
Cool. So here I have scientists and engineers have figured out ways to use CRISPR-Cas9 to precisely edit the DNA of many organisms. So this is an application. So you took something that the bacteria lovingly evolved over billions of years, and humans with their clever brains have figured out a way to turn that tool into technology. And so for people like Min, this is extremely exciting, and that plays into their taste. And for me, again, I really like narrative. Application is cool. I acknowledge that it's cool. It doesn't make me feel like excited, you know? I'm reporting my actual feeling, which is different than my conscious knowledge of the subject. These also appeal to a sense of problem solving. So there is a problem that, you know, we keep on banging our heads trying to genetically engineer model organisms to try to better understand what genes do. CRISPR makes it very simple for people now, so there's a huge barrier to research that has just been lifted. And again, there's some people that really that like lights a fire in them, and it doesn't for me. I again acknowledge, very important, very cool. I don't feel anything when I read that though. And then impact. This will have a profound impact on society. So these are big moves, right? And for certain people, that feeling of we are living in a unique period of history, like we are living through a revolution in biology. For some people, that really is significant for them. But I don't have that perspective, even though I can acknowledge that. Yeah. So the dyslexic demon says, I like mechanism. It's a big reason why I'm doing biology. So I can apply similar concepts to engineering. We love that. And I bet we'll talk a little bit. I bet you have some things to say about that.
Yeah, hold on to that thought, dyslexic demon. I plus one.
We're literally about to just vamp about what we like about what we like. Like this is all these 18 slides have all just been building up to this final one where we're just gonna like geek out about the stuff that we like. Okay, so we have the language that Terence Tao provided us in terms of defining what makes good science, and we can transfer that definition of good science to understanding what we like about what we like, and hopefully doing this exercise will make you more conscious and more aware of what you like. And that's what I have to say about that, right? So we're just now going to kind of vamp, and we're going to do that through the lens of should you do science of engineering. So we didn't mention this up top, but maybe you've pieced it together that Min is trained in engineering and I am trained in basic science. So I am a basic science research or teacher. Yeah. My training was in basic biology, as in understanding and uncovering the reality of biology, not using biology to solve problems. So this is pretty unstructured, but I think a natural segue from that last point is, Min, do you want to define biological engineering? This is such a...
Oh my goodness.
You do it every semester, I bet.
I mean, I think my definition also changes every semester. Like, ask any of the professors in our department and you'll get a different answer, like, and they're all in the same department, which I think is what makes the field so exciting, because we're still trying to pin down what it actually means. But the way I define it, it's like, you kind of think about what mechanical engineering or electrical engineering is, and it's like trying to create these like repeatable processes or machinery from, if mechanical engineering, like mechanical parts. With electrical engineering, you're trying to control signals in a repeatable and robust way. But to do engineering with biology now, like using cells as the tool and substrate itself, that's biological engineering. And I just a tidbit, like that is what makes it different from biomedical engineering, which is making tools to help with like health. Think prosthetics. Yeah.
And so if I were to cut in and just say like what I define as basic biology, it's as I said, like we're trying to uncover what evolution did. I think that's a pretty concise definition of molecular biology at the very least. Just what are we even?
Yeah.
And so I want to use the language that we talked about during the stream and kind of walk through why we like what we like. And I'll go first. So for me, I had always been a fan of like writing. I wrote like fan fiction as a kid, as a very young, undifferentiated cell. I wrote a lot of fan fiction because I love stories. I loved cartoons, I loved shows, and you know, my dad used to read stories to me right before bed. I've had a long history with the enjoyment of stories and narrative, and to me, that's important in biology or studying biology specifically, because biology is like the greatest story ever told, right? It's infinitely complex. It's got struggles in it. It's got tension. You know, it's got all the aspects of stories in it, and so that process has always appealed to me. And something that really solidified, weirdly enough, my love for biology was the movie Ozzy. Oh, what is it? It's not Ozzy and Drix, because Ozzy and Drix is the cartoon version of the movie. Min, do you know what I'm talking about, or are you too young?
Like the blue amoeba cell with the red pill one.
Yeah.
Right.
There's I think a Cartoon Network movie.
Ozzy Jones,
Osmosis Jones.
Osmosis Jones.
Yeah. For those of you who are younger, maybe you don't remember or never heard of Osmosis Jones, but if you know Cells at Work, basically America did Cells at Work before Cells at Work. Cells at Work being the critically
that's a good way of putting
anime.
it.
But Osmosis Jones was like following a white blood cell through the body in a pill, like a mech that was made out of medicine, and just following their like buddy cop dynamic through the body. I think the big bad in that movie was like scarlet fever, which I think is a fictional virus. But it showed me from a very young age that biology could be personified. And like, as a teacher, I should say you shouldn't do that. You should not literally personify biology, because that's bad. That's a bad habit, because personifying biology in your practice of biology is assigning agency where there is none. Right? Evolution doesn't have a story purpose beyond just surviving. But you can personify biology if you're doing it just to have a good time, right? If it motivates you to study it, that's good. You shouldn't take personification of biology as truth or let it guide your scientific thinking. So narrative has always been extremely important for me. And so that's why I think basic science always appealed to me more than engineering. And I want to hear from you, man. Why engineering for you?
Just want to thank you, Dyslexic Demon. I see you. I read that comment. Why engineering? I think I'll go back to your comment about the refrigerator and you not being curious about how it works, because every time I open the fridge, I can't help but to wonder how it works. So I think our minds are just wired very differently. And I think that's what makes being in the STEM field so fun. For me, I like knowing how specific things work, but I don't like to stop there. I like to try to abstract and generalize, like, okay, this is the working principle of this specific thing, but how can it be generalized and applied to various other fields and like other contexts? I think with engineering, you draw inspiration for solutions from so many different spaces that, like, when you think about, for example, molecular motors, that very idea of motors came from mechanical engineering. But here we are in like the microscopic, like protein level, and still looking at these like things that do not look like mechanical motors, yet we still are able to like use the generalizations to say, oh, it produces like force, then it's a motor. So I think that's what makes engineering, especially biological engineering, so exciting for me.
So I have a follow-up question on that, man. Does that application of the refrigerator apply for a lot of things in your life? Or is it like regulated to certain fields? Like, are you curious as to how like the government works, for example? Or is it gated by like your taste?
Yeah, I think, let's see. You're saying like how far reaching is my curiosity about refrigerators?
The inherent curiosity to see things through, like,
Oh
because
yeah.
I would say that I'm not incurious as to like how things
Uh-huh.
work, but like
Oh,
to
okay.
me, I care mostly about how cells work. Like beyond
Yeah.
that, I don't really care.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So like, what's is like is the curiosity like scope specific
Yeah, yeah,
or
yeah.
like field? Mm, that's a good question. I would say I'm not as interested in the government as I am in refrigerators. Um,
Gotcha.
yeah. I will say it is specific to certain disciplines, but usually if they fall in like the sciences, I don't really, for me personally, I don't delineate between different fields of science too much. I try to find as many like connections between the different fields as possible. So that's why like thinking about refrigerators can also inspire me to think about cells as well.
And I should jet in and say that like we're just two individuals. Like you can be great scientists and engineers and become like nothing like us, right? But this is
Yep. Yep.
to help. You know, if you contrast with us, it's interesting to hear the ways that you are different from us and similar, and that might help. But this is not like I would not like I objectively would not make a good scientist, but I make a fantastic science educator. You know, so whether or not you should study science, I can try to sell you on studying science. I can't sell you on being a scientist, though. It's two different things,
Mhm.
right? So yeah, so it's probably interesting to get into how your interests are gated, in the sense what inherently makes a refrigerator less interesting than government, but that's probably too much for this particular stream.
Maybe, yeah.
When I polled my friends in terms of like answering this question that's on the screen, like why did you choose science, a not insignificant number of them just said that science was just cool. They're like, oh, like, why do you study viruses? Well, because viruses are cool. And that's very much what my motivation to do grad school was as well. Like, I just thought biology was cool, so I studied biology. I didn't really have a deeper motivation than that, honestly. And I'm wondering what motivates you, Min, besides curiosity or
Yeah,
yeah.
I think what like a reason why you start a field is not necessarily the same reason you stay in a field. Um, I would say I started going down this route of biology slash engineering for very similar reasons to you. Like, yeah, cells are darn cool. Um, but the idea of applications, that's like kind of like a developing an acquired taste, or that I'm kind of still developing about like, um, yeah, so yeah, I'll leave it at that. Biology is cool, and like making it do stuff that you want it to do is even cooler.
Can you walk? Okay, this is a weird question, so I'll answer my own question first. But I would like for you to walk through your experience of finding something cool, because that might be useful to relate to or to not relate to.
Yeah.
And it'd be interesting to do either or. But in terms of like, you know, I do this channel and I have to do a lot of like novel research for this channel. And for me, the experience of finding something cool is a very emotional one. Like, when people say, oh, that's cool, it's very, you know, you don't always get to hear why or like what that experience is like, especially for people who might not find, like people who are maybe not as curious or trying to cultivate curiosity. But when I find a particularly clever adaptation by a pathogen, which is what I'm really into these days, like, I almost have like a reaction of, oh, the smarts, you know, like I imagine each pathogen as its own entity, and the same way that you would imagine a villain in a movie coming up with a dastardly plan that like wrecks the protagonist stuff, you know, like that same feeling of suspense drama. That's what I find, you know, that elicits that emotional reaction to the content, right? So I hear that engineers think a lot of things are cool, but I don't exactly know what about their stuff, like what is it that you find cool?
Yeah. I think, let's see. I would say the main component for what I find things cool is how related it is to just like how related it is to very orthogonal fields or like very separate fields. Going back to the motors example, it's like when you see a motor and like visualize like motor proteins walking down the like cytoskeleton and think about how to make that like run like a car. I think just like imagining cars inside cells, that's fun and cool. It's very amusing to conjure up that picture as well. Also, maybe I'm like a control freak or something, but the engineering part implies that you're trying to make this system do what you want it to do. And the fact that you can make a system do what you want it to do, that's very fun and cool to me. So I don't necessarily want to just observe and appreciate it, like biology in all its glory, but I also wanted to make it do what I want it to do. So that's a very fun activity for me.
Yeah, part of that, like, part of what you said that resonates to me, you know, we're not entirely dissimilar, but seeing connections, I think, is quite fun. And maybe there's an aspect of unveiling a mystery that goes into learning stuff that is cool, right? Like, the interconnected disciplinary things where you can, like, make these connections. I wonder, and this is just me speculating, but I wonder if there's something neurobiological about that that's satisfying. Right?
Yeah.
You know, we evolved to learn. We're the #1 learners on the planet, right? And so maybe when those synapses fire, when there's like a thought that gets connected to another thought, maybe that's rewarding.
Yeah.
That
I'm
would
just
be
gonna
neat.
interject like it as like a self-assessment for whether or not you want to like pursue like I don't know, but I remember back in high school, like when my math teacher or my physics teacher would be saying something, I would be trying to actively relate it to my other classes, like chemistry and biology. And when yes, I was that student, like I would bring up a biology topic in physics class, like other students would groan, but I sparked so much, I derived so much joy from making the connections between the classes. I don't know if you feel the same way, but
That's so
yeah.
interesting. So
Yeah.
I don't. And you know, for chat, like again, Min is correct. You know, like that behavior is correct behavior, right? But the reason why I find that to be interesting is because part of my metacognitive process was to try and ask one good question per class during university, and that's kind of related to what you're saying about like bringing in biology into physics. You know, you were doing what I was doing unintentionally, but it would force me to like push my understanding of a certain topic to the point where I could come up with a question that might stump the professor. And I didn't mean to do it to stump them, right? My intention wasn't to prove like, oh, I could like find something that you don't know, but like if I could identify a question without an answer, that means that I've understood enough about the field to have my own ideas.
I never thought of it that way, but yeah.
I think that to me is the equivalent of you making connections, is the feeling of coming up with something new. Like my brain made something up that is untested. I can't guarantee that nobody has had the same thought as me before, right? But part of what made science so fun when I was doing science is the idea that I had thoughts that were not tested and that I could be the one to test them. So that was appealing about science. And that's the same about engineering, right? I'm guessing that's not like specific to science.
Yeah, I think that goal is shared amongst the fields.
Like once you do grad school, man, the feeling, I mean, you've already done a couple of proposals, right? Grant proposals of some kind. Maybe not grant proposals, but research proposals, right? Certainly in your training. But I think the idea, the feeling that you get when you have a research idea that nobody else has had is like the craziest feeling. Like you, in that moment, when you've learned enough science to have a thought that nobody else has acted upon, puts you in a very exclusive VIP, you know, like it's special. Not a lot of people can say that, right?
Yeah, but it's a tricky situation to be in as well, because you are maybe one of the few people who are thinking or these questions are unanswered, like it is very easy for some douche to be like, well, that's a dumb question, and like not give a second thought to it when it actually there's actual genuine novelty in that question. So I think this ties back to the idea of grit, maybe. But
Thank you for bringing it
just
back.
yeah, to some extent, you gotta believe in yourself. Not to be cheesy or anything, but you actually do.
I want to reframe that in the negative, man. I think that like, yes, you should believe in yourself, but the way I think to make it less cheesy and to make it more accessible and relatable for a general audience is that you can't not believe in yourself.
Yeah.
If you think you're going to fail, you're going to fail. I'm not saying you should be like, oh, I'm awesome, I'm gonna succeed. Like, that kind of mentality is very hard to get. But a step to getting there is just not thinking that you can't do something. That doesn't mean that you're going to think that you can do it, but as long as you're not actively sabotaging yourself. Like, I've had students who are sabotaging themselves, whether they know it or not. And I think the takeaway is don't freaking do that.
Yep. Not helping anybody.
Yeah. So I think we have to address the elephant in the room, in the sense that we're two teachers talking about whether or not you should do either discipline, when in reality we don't have industry experience, right? Neither of us do. That's very important to acknowledge. We can't tell you whether or not you should devote your life to science or engineering. We can tell you what makes science and engineering fun to study, but we would be way out of our depth if we were to give you career advice, right? This is not a career advice stream.
Yep.
I did ask my friends who are in industry, I asked a scientist and an engineer what their perspective was on this, and I thought I would share it just to give you a realistic grounding for our discussion here. Is that what I learned from them was the very practical reality that engineering gives you tools that make you attractive to employers. That doesn't mean you can't be an attractive candidate with a basic biology degree. Doesn't mean that at all, right? But from their anecdotal experience, again, I haven't done industry research on this, but from their anecdotal experience, it seemed like having engineering was more useful for employment. I can't personally confirm if that's true or not, but it's worth considering. Toxo, fun parallel is neutral affirmations, not saying you're not able to do things, but also not saying, hey, I'm the best and can definitely do the thing. Thank you. Yes. Oh, so it's got a name. Cool. Instead, it's more like, hey, I don't know if I can, but I'm going to try. That's awesome. I think that's a great mentality to have. To speak a little more to that in terms of a personal story, that like, I have a working memory of like 5 items. Like, it's very low for a biologist. Like, if you tell me your phone number, I'm not going to be able to get it. Even on a good day when I've had plenty of sleep, my brain just can't hold that much information at one time. And that's really tough for a biologist. That's tough for any academic, right? Because if you've read an academic paper, those sentences are very long. And so these sentences that are like a dozen words each, sometimes I'll forget the beginning of sentences before I get to the end. And this made me feel very stupid, right? It didn't make me feel smart. It felt like my peers had a much easier time with class than I did, and that made me feel dumb. And I started to not believe that I could perform as well. And you know, the brain is very smart. It's not going to spend extra energy that it thinks it can get away with saving. And so if you don't believe in yourself, your brain is going to automatically protect you from trying because it doesn't want to expend those resources in a venture that isn't going to be fruitful, right? So you don't have to be like, oh, I'm gonna be the best, because that's maybe unrealistic or just not your personality. But you can't sabotage yourself from the starting line. Once I actually went to a therapist for this problem, right? Like, that's how deeply this affects me. Like, that's why I'm so angry at the idea of intelligence or talking about intelligence like it matters. Like, by acknowledging that intelligence is fixed, you've already lost. And so it took therapy to kind of unwind my negative opinion of myself. I don't think I'm like dumb. I just think that my working memory sucks, and that causes challenges in certain ways, but that doesn't make me any less capable than anybody else. It's why that if you have a tough time in university, you should maybe get checked if you need accommodations. Like at the university that we teach at, this like very, very high level, your parents wish you went to this university place. A good number of students need learning accommodations. It's not because they're any less worthy or any less intelligent. It's just that sometimes you're just wired in a way that makes conventional learning a little tougher. That doesn't mean your potential is any less than anybody else's. Sorry, that was a long rant about.
No, I totally agree with you. And like, it's definitely stigmatized. Like needing additional help means you're dumb, right? Like it's not the case, and it's definitely stigmatized. And I've learned, like, especially from a lot of pedagogy, like tools and classes I've sat in, it's like things that help, like the students that need it. For example, like things that help ADHD students actually just help all students in general. So you shouldn't just localize the help to just them. It's like, it's probably just generally good teaching practices if it can reach a wider audience.
Yeah, you know, within the boundary of having it be practical to administer in a class, you know. Like,
yeah, exactly.
If everybody had to get like additional time, it would make class kind of challenging.
Yeah.
But the sentiment still remains, right? Like it's not, you're not any less worthy of, you know, you're not worth less just because you need a learning accommodation. It's just, you know, it sucks to not be able to read a sentence without having to read it a couple times. But once you do have that sentence nailed, what you do with it is the same as everybody else in terms of you know, your potential. So you know, don't let that be a barrier. I totally got like sidetracked. There was something that I wanted to point out. Oh, yeah, practical difference between science and engineering. Engineers get paid more. You know?
True.
Like, again, I can't tell you, it's not career advice stream, but this wraps back to passion and the role that passion plays. Like, I would say Min and I, we're both pretty passionate people. I would say that I rely more on my passion than Min does, in the sense where if I'm not doing something that I enjoy for a living, that's going to suck more for me than it would for Min. But from what I hear from people with industry experience, the people that choose to do science are typically the people that need to do their passion. You're effectively taking a pay cut to do science, so you better like it, right? If you want to do biology and you're not sure if you want to do science or engineering, but you don't really like science isn't like, you know, you're not really that into learning biology, my recommendation and the recommendation of the industry people that I talk to is, if you're good at it, if you're good enough at it, do engineering, because you can make more money and then you can live a happier life. Like, not everybody has to be super passionate. You have anything to add to that, Min?
I would say, like, well, based on like my peers that are like pursuing industry, from what I hear, it's like, even if you're like a bioengineer or trained in biology, like when you're on the wet lab bench, you're like, you are still kind of like piecing together knowledge and like exploring ideas. So it's maybe not so much different when you actually get to the wet lab bench. You're still learning, like whether or not you're pursuing science or engineering, or you're in industry or in academia, you will still be learning nonetheless. So just like a word of reassurance, if you think like, oh no, industry will stifle my learning, like that's definitely not the case.
And to bounce off of that, you know, just because you pick science or engineering doesn't mean you can't pick the other thing later. Actually, both of the industry people that I talk to, not industry, but like professionals, they either started in science, went to engineering, or started in engineering and then went to science for various reasons that are pretty interesting. As long as you're into it, you're going to be able to pick it up. Like if you choose to do STEM, I believe in you. Because if you choose to do STEM by your own volition, you've already demonstrated a certain amount of passion. It might not pan out for everybody, but for the majority of you, I believe in you. So I have a question here from the Dyslexic Demon, if I may ask, what accommodations did I get? So I didn't get any accommodations, because actually a working memory of 5 is the low end of normal. So I don't qualify for a learning accommodation. So I wouldn't have deserved one. I just needed to work a little harder, right? Like, that's just kind of reality. Like, I have a certain stat block, and the reality is that there are certain aspects of learning that will be more challenging for me than there will be for other people, and vice versa, right? I'll be better at certain things that are in my wheelhouse than other people are, right? Like, in terms of my grades in grad school, I was squarely in the middle. Like, there were people that I did better in terms of the classes, like in terms of actual quality of science done, that's a different story. But if I were to benchmark myself, just because my working memory was bad didn't impede my ability to perform well in class, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, yeah. I don't know. Min, do you have any other, like, lingering thoughts? I'm chill to just, like, chat for a little bit, but, to me, I think I've said my piece in terms of what I wanted to get out there.
Yeah, I think I always like just to, I forget the term, but devil's advocate, like this dichotomy between science and engineering, like how helpful of a framework is it to begin with? Like,
ooh, good question. Actually,
yeah,
I overheard in a faculty meeting that our faculty was describing biology as converging onto engineering to begin with. You know, as basic biology continues, it starts to look more and more like engineering.
Yeah, it's like before, like the idea of like science and engineering like being two different things, like we do have a lot of similarities nonetheless. Like we are both very curious people. Like maybe what we're curious about may differ, but like I think you see the value of applications as much as I do. Like we like, I don't know, like
that's a good question.
Yeah.
So I think we talked about this before, actually, in our first attempt to do this kind of content, but something that's important that is different between us is the training that we get. And we could talk a little bit about the difference in our scope of training, and that might sway people one way or another. So I don't know if you want to go first.
Yeah, so, okay, so as Bai said, I'm more traditionally trained in engineering, and why I liked my engineering training was because, as I alluded to before, was like how generalizable it was, and namely it's the math. Like there's this one course in engineering called signals and systems. What type of signals, what type of systems? Like the joy of it is it doesn't matter what type of signals or what type of system you're thinking about, because it boils down to the same math. And if your reaction to that is, wow, that's terrifying, or if your reaction to that is like, wow, that's amazing, like that may be one type of indicator whether or not engineering is for you. For me, I derive a lot of joy from thinking about electrical systems the same way I think about biological circuits and networks. So that's the sort of abstractions that we were trained in as bioengineers.
And that's a great segue into the point that, like, one of the two people that I talked to behind the scenes for this stream, the one that switched from engineering to science, actually cited the amount of seemingly unrelated math to the problems that they wanted to solve as being a reason why they pivoted. So to contrast with that, so I described your training as very broad. Like you were given tools in your engineering training, and it's up to you to determine how you use those tools in your engineering practice, right? So it might feel discouraging for certain students to learn all of that and be like, why the heck do I need to know this? Why do I need to know this? Why do I need to know that? And the idea is that you don't know what you need to know until you actually have to do something.
Yep. So I totally agree. And especially with like the breadth of training, like I found that liberating, whereas some students or like some of my peers found that discouraging because they left undergrad feeling unprepared for a specific niche. Whereas my reaction was like, wow, I'm glad I'm not confined to a specific like niche. Because so again, I'm really playing the generalizability card and saying that like I like having that diverse toolkit.
You also have a higher self-efficacy, I can imagine. Like you believe in yourself.
Yes, I really do. I think people should, in general, believe in themselves.
When you get into the real world, though, you'll be trained to do what you need to do. You just need the foundation, and getting an engineering degree gives you a foundation of tools. In terms of my training, as a traditional biologist with a bit more education than you, it's like it's a similar principle, but it looks very different. Like for us, we have to know everything about the cell. We have to know everything about biology. Because the more you know about biology in general, the more you can draw connections, the better you'll be able to solve the story of biology. Dyslexic Demon, I have to leave, but I'm glad I caught the stream. You guys touched pretty much exactly what I needed to hear. Thank you for dropping by. I'm glad that we could be of use. Have a good rest of your night if it's nighttime where you are.
Yeah, bye, Dyslexic Demon.
But yeah, like, we have to know every freaking thing. We have to know about every organelle. We have to know about every important metabolite in our basic training. We have to know very in-depth different pathways that are required. We're required to know them, as in we're required to learn them. We're not required to keep that in memory, but we have to at least be aware that they exist. So everybody that leaves with a basic biology degree has a foundational knowledge of how everything in the cell works. So when you go to grad school or when you do, your actual in-field research, you don't need to take another class to figure out how your thing works. You already know generally how biology works, and then you can tunnel in and learn the specifics. So that kind of scope is what I loved. I loved learning about everything in biology. And again, I'm a very passionate person. I wasn't thinking about getting a job. I was just kind of coping. I was just kind of hoping that I would find one. Like, I didn't worry too much about employability. But at the same time, while I was doing like my undergrad, I was also teaching the entire time. I've actually done teaching since I was in high school. And so like, to me, teaching was never a job option because I didn't know about the job that we currently have. And because I spent like a decade honing this skill, I believe that made me a more attractive candidate. So I can't give advice on how to be a biology scientist, but if you want to be a biology instructor, then I have some words, right?
Yep, I think, yeah, that's pretty cool. When you were talking about how you had to know all the details of the cell, like half of our field name is bioengineering, but I would say I'm a pretty weak biologist. Like, I kind of sweep as many details under the rug as possible and try to get away with it. I guess, everyone has different strategies in the field.
And the thing is that we work together. Scientists and engineers work together, and there's a lot of collaboration in the STEM space. So if you don't know everything about the cell, ask a biologist. If you don't know how to make something, ask an engineer, right? We don't have to be the perfect scientist or the perfect STEM person, right? We got a fun question in chat asking about our favorite YouTube channels. I don't know if you have an answer, but I have one.
Oh, 3 Blue, 1 Brown. I love math.
Do you want to talk about what that is?
Yeah, so 3 Blue 1 Brown is a math animation channel. So I think not only does Grant Sanderson, which is the creator of 3 Blue 1 Brown, do an excellent job at animations, but he is also an excellent storyteller and is able to like frame these mathematical problems in these very compelling ways. And you can't help but you leave after watching the videos a more curious person, and I think that's the most endearing part about his videos.
Dude, we're so like deep in the sauce of teaching. My favorite channel is also an education channel. It's Oversimplified, who's a huge educational content creator who does like history animations, and the reason why he's great is the same reason why your channel is great, and it serves as a major inspiration for this channel. Like and people have compared my voice to Oversimplified's voice too, and I just want to say I own that. I do sound like him, and I am greatly inspired by the work he does, but I'm doing biology, he's doing history, so it's not a complete overlap.
That's a word?
Let me see, is there anything else that I wanted to say? I am working on a SCOBY, so I'm brewing some kombucha. I said that I would eat a SCOBY on stream at 1K, and we have blown past that milestone.
Congratulations!
So, thank you so much. Min has been around since like basically the inception of this channel, so it's been fun to like tell him about how it's going, or how it's been going. So that will happen. The SCOBY is very small at this point, so it'll, with everything in biology, it takes time to grow, right? So when that is up, that'll be ready. And I'm aiming to have my video about gonorrhea out sometime next week, or the week after, but that should be coming out soon. And I hope you stick around to watch that because I think it's really freaking cool. I don't, do you know anything about gonorrhea, Min?
I don't actually know that much about it. Glad I don't have it, but but I know it's that's the most that I could say.
I think that's going to be the reaction of many people who are going to see that thumbnail, because I did the rabies one, which is obviously responsible for so much of my channel's growth.
Glad I don't have that either.
Exactly, right? Rabies in that video is like rabies. I used to pray to to the Christian God that I didn't have that, because biology can be terrifying.
I like all those cute squirrels on campus are not so cute anymore to me.
Oh no. The other thing is, I don't want my channel to be like a neuroses channel, right? So there are so many comments on that rabies video that are like, when are you going to do prions? I'm like, I will do prions when I am ready to do prions, because the thing about prions is that they are terrifying, but I don't want to terrify people. That's not what this channel is. If you want to satisfy your morbid curiosity, go to a different YouTube channel. I'm here to make you excited to learn, and not here to give you another thing to have anxiety over.
Yeah.
Cool. Then I think we're gonna wrap up here, Min. Because you're anonymous, I assume you don't have anything to plug, but is there anything that you want to plug?
Not off the top of my head, but just thank you again for inviting me to your channel, and you have a great audience that I love interacting with, so it's really support a community, and I'll continue supporting you even though I may not be your office mate after this year.
I know, but, I'm so sad.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Man, I might reach out to you, when you're deep into your career and check up again if you'll have me.
Yeah,
I'd be curious to see how things are going, a year or two in the future.
Yeah, I will be at a different stage in the academic career, but maybe I'll have different insights to chime in on.
Yeah, that'd be so much fun. Thank you all for coming out. I hope you have a good rest of your day. I hope that you have something to think about. I'm